a quorum. So the time being 1:31, I'll call the September 8th, 2021 STRGBA Groundwater Sustainability Agency meeting to order. Welcome everybody and thanks for joining us. Like I said, we do have a quorum, so I'll run through who we've got here. We got me, I'm Eric Thorburn from Oakdale Irrigation District. I've got the City of Oakdale, Michael Renfro, City of Waterford, Mike Pitcock, and Modesto Irrigation District, Chad Tinkin and company there. Did I miss anybody else? Not seeing Walt or Michael Riddell or Miguel yet. Oh, there's Walt. Walt is on the attendee list. So Walt is here. Thanks for joining us, Walt. The others will probably follow up shortly here. So let's just keep going. So item number 2, business from the public. At this time, interested parties are welcome to introduce any topic within the agency's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the agency at this meeting. So we'll open that up to the public. Business from the public. Okay, hearing none, seeing no hands raised, we'll move on to item 3, which is the meeting minutes. Assuming everybody's had a chance to review the meeting minutes, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Chad.
Renfro, second.
Thank you, Renfro. Any comments from the member agencies? Okay, hearing none, seeing none. Any comments from the public? Again, hearing none, seeing none. We'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And thank you. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We'll move on to item number 4, which is the budget and the schedule update. And Gordon, I think you were going to take the lead on that.
Right. Good afternoon. So far we've spent 69% of the funds available to us on preparing the GSP, and we've used 87% of the schedule. So we're coming down to the wire, and that's all I had.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Comments, feedback, questions from member agencies? Okay, let's open it up to the public. Questions, comments from the public? The budget or schedule? Budget and schedule. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, public outreach update. Samantha, I think that's you.
Yep. I have just a really short update for today. On Wednesday, August 25th, we hosted our 3rd office hours session over Zoom. There were about 20 people that came, half of which probably were STRGBA representatives, but we did still have a few members of the public. Phyllis gave a brief presentation about monitoring well networks and the management areas, and there was a little bit of a question and answer portion as well. We did record the office hours, and there's been a couple technical difficulties on our end, but it should be up on STRGBA's YouTube page today and on the website at least by the end of the week if anyone is interested in going back and watching it. And then the only other item I have is that typically we have done a newsletter in the fall timeframe. I know there's a lot going on with getting the chapters out, but if that's something that the group is interested in doing, I'd be happy to put something together with the assistance of topic suggestions from you all.
Okay, I think it's something we should consider. Maybe we could send out an email and solicit some feedback after the call, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Miguel has joined us from the City of Modesto. Welcome, Miguel.
How you doing, Eric?
Good, good. Okay, so on item 5, the public outreach, are there any questions, feedback from the member agencies on that? Okay, anything from the public on item number 5, public outreach update? All right, great. We'll move on to item number 6, GSP update. You gonna take the lead on that, Phyllis?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. If you will stick around for our upcoming TAC meeting, we will go through everything in detail. Essentially, we are in the throes of finishing up our sustainable management criteria, doing the analysis of projects, developing management actions, and getting the GSP written so that we can get chapters out. The next chapter that's coming out is the one on water budgets, and it should be out very soon as we get some of this modeling out of the way so that the modeling team can finish up incorporating all of the TAC comments. Today, we're going to be talking about the modeling of projects and some of the sustainable management criteria. So stick around for that.
All right, thank you, Phyllis. Comments, questions from the member agencies on item number 6? Okay, comments, questions from the public on the GSP update? Okay, I think we'll probably end up hearing from people at the TAC meeting that's going to follow this GSA meeting. So let's move on to item number 7. The next scheduled meeting is October 13th at 1:30 p.m. on Zoom again. Questions, comments, public from the member agencies rather? Okay, anything from the public on item number 7? The next meeting date and time. All right, that's going to wrap up the meeting. I don't think we have any items that are too late for the agenda. So if that is the case, I think it is, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the GSA meeting.
Renfro motion.
Thanks, Renfro.
I'll second.
Thanks, Chad. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Let's move right into the TAC meeting. So it's 1:39. It was a quick GSA meeting. So I'll call the September 8th, 2021 STRGBA GSA TAC meeting to order now. So thanks for sticking with us. On the phone, we still have City of Oakdale, Michael Renfro, City of Modesto, Miguel. I don't see the City of Riverbank here yet. He may join us late. We have everybody else, City of Waterford, Mike Peacock, myself from Oakdale Irrigation District, Modesto Irrigation District, Chad Tinkin is here, and Stanislaus County, we have Walt Ward. So we obviously have a quorum. So let's move to item number 2, business from the public. At this time, interested persons are welcome to introduce any topic within the agency's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the agency at this meeting. So open up to the public. Okay, quiet group today so far. Let's move on to item number 3. Let's approve the meeting minutes. Assuming everybody's had a chance to read through those, I'll entertain a motion. Approval of the minutes.
Renfro motion.
Thanks, Renfro.
Second it.
That's you, Miguel?
Yes.
Thank you. Comments on the minutes from the member agencies? Comments from the public on the meeting minutes? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. Let's Move on to motion passes. Move on to item number 4, GSP projects and sustainable yield analysis. That's going to be Woodard and Grin. Is that you, Dominic?
It is Dominic. Hi, it's Phyllis. I'm just going to quickly introduce him while he's getting his screen up and getting things ready to go. So as you can recall from the last time, we are going to be modeling the projects in groups. And this is the results from our first group of project modeling. So Dominic, as the lead modeler of this project, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Awesome. Thank you both, Phyllis and Eric, and thank you everyone for attending today. From that delightful introduction, to kind of give you kind of a little bit more detailed rundown of some of the discussion items that I like to go over with everyone today is, well, first we're off, I want to make sure we have a couple introductory slides relating to the regulations as far as they relate to project and management actions. Make sure we kind of check that box when it comes to our STRGBA requirements. But kind of diving deeper into that, really what we want to go into is we want to go into a kind of a more detailed review of the existing projects. And this is a set of projects that has been compiled through coordination with the various agencies. And really we kind of go into, and we're going to separate them into a couple different groups and figuring out both of their probability and then eventually what is going to be the impact that we're going to see if these projects go into place. And then really once we kind of have a framework of the different projects that we're evaluating under STRGBA, the goal is to break it up into a couple different scenarios based on based on the probability of those occurring, as I mentioned earlier. So today I have kind of a couple introductions for outlining the framework of our project and management actions, but then additionally we also have some of the modeling results, effectively our first scenario. So I'd like to be able to share that with everybody today. Oops. So if we want to get into some of those details, the first step is taking a look at what are our regulatory requirements. And really effectively, STRGBA outlines really kind of two main items related to this. One is that each plan, each subbasin has to include a description of projects or management actions, effectively come up with a game plan for how do we intend to achieve sustainability. And we effectively have to do a quantitative analysis of that and share that as part of our GSP. In addition to that, we need to be able to evaluate these projects and these management actions, kind of get an idea of how they affect some of the milestones or minimum thresholds, and effectively really what's the quantitative component as to both how these projects affect our subbasin, effectively showing that we're making progress and that these projects really do have that end goal in mind. So what are our projects and management actions? Well, before we get into that, I want to kind of like set up really how we're going to kind of approach it. And really that is going to be to break our projects and management actions into three main groups. First, we have group 1. These are ongoing management actions. These are ongoing projects. These are effectively things that are been currently put in place since the implementation of STRGBA that are going to affect our groundwater system. And so if anybody remembers, we developed the baseline model, that kind of that 50-year projection of what our subbasin is going to look like under kind of some of our projected conditions. This is really taking that one extra step of saying, well, we know that since the implementation of STRGBA, we have a couple projects that have since been in place, and we really want to be able to quantify those and understand how those have affected our system, in addition to what is already in the baseline, what has already been occurring before we began this whole process. We have group 2. Group 2 are what we consider planned projects and management actions. These are really effectively projects that are readily implementable. We are going to say that we are kind of taking those initial steps, whether that's feasibility studies, taking a look at how reasonable a lot of these projects are, but acknowledging that many of these are still in the kind of the planning stages. There's still a lot of uncertainty with both how they're going to be designed, how they're going to be implemented. But really, this is things that we would really like to implement, and that they're kind of at a readily available point in their implementation process. And then finally, there's going to be group 3, what we're going to consider supplemental projects and management actions. And effectively, these are more kind of conceptual in nature. They're ideas that we've had or that the various agencies or local stakeholders have proposed to the group. These are things that we want to include in the GSP as kind of potential items for us to look at down the road. And but they're not quite ready to fully come to fruition. They're really more subject to their feasibility, and so they're really just kind of an ideas that we're having, but not necessarily things that we're looking to implement directly as of today. So if we want to break up what are some of those projects, effectively what I have here is a list of the projects and management actions that we're considering group 1 or group 2. So these are the projects that are either already in place or they're kind of already in the planning stages. They're fairly fairly into the process of planning, of developing, and they're fairly feasible. They think that they're something that we can quantify as putting directly into our GSP. Now, for kind of to break that information down a little bit deeper, we've kind of broken them up into kind of 3 types or 3 categories. The first being is what we're considering our urban projects. These are going to be predominantly going to be proposed by both the City of Waterford and the City of Modesto, and these are projects that are effectively, we have a kind of a group 1 project, which is a kind of some of the conservation efforts that the City of Modesto has been incorporating over the past 5 to 6 years, and kind of effectively since they're based on their urban water management plans and based on since Sigma's implementation. And so we're going to simulate that and see how does that affect the subbasin as a whole comparatively to our baseline. In addition to that, we also have a storm drain cross connection removal project. And this is effectively a recharge project by the City of Modesto. And again, I'll get into these details of exactly what these projects are, exactly how we're going to quantify them here in a couple slides. But really the idea behind this outline right here is really kind of to show that really how we're going to end up simulating, how we're going to be quantifying this, both the projects and their effects on the subbasin as whole. And then this final urban project that we have here is a surface water supply project. It's actually in conjunction between Waterford, the City of Modesto, and Modesto Irrigation District. And this is the idea of bringing surface water to the cities of Waterford. So then as we separate out from our urban projects, we also have a couple in lieu supply and recharge projects. This is going to be predominantly both the Modesto Irrigation District and Oakdale Irrigation District, bringing water available to some of the non-district areas. And so this is the idea behind this, is this would be to, whenever available, that to be able to supply water during the irrigation season to those currently predominantly on groundwater, in the eastern sections of our subbasin that do not traditionally receive water, are not traditionally part of these 2 districts. In addition to some of our in lieu use, we also have a few flood mitigation projects. Now, these effectively what these are is going to be to capture some of the wintertime flows, some of the stormwater runoff that we have within our basin and some of the upper watersheds. And the goal of this is to really capture this water and to apply it onto our land in the form of direct recharge, whether that's recharge basins, whether that's direct application to agricultural fields. Some of the details of getting yet to be fully worked out, but the goal of this is to take wintertime flow and to be able to recharge it directly into our basin. And then finally, as far as more of a management action rather than a direct project, the goal is that once we are able to quantify what are the impacts of each of these projects, to be able to look at the overall, to revisit that demand reduction, really what does it take for us to bring our basin into sustainability once all these projects have been implemented. So next question is probably, well, how do we intend on quantifying this, and really how we on each of these projects and really evaluating what we have here. Well, the goal on how to achieve that is really to break this set of 7 projects into effectively what we have is 3 main scenarios. And as we can see here, that scenario 1 includes each of the urban projects. Now, these are generally considered the high probability of occurrence, and it's really that, and because of that, and because of the sector, or the kind of the urban and municipal sector, we really want to implement these kind of as their own scenario. And really, so that's what I have for everybody today, because I've already gone through the process of modeling these projects. And we'll kind of get into some of those details here in a second. But in addition to that, we also want to be able to break that down into kind of add on top of that, right? So we're going to start with really our highly probable municipal projects that we already have being in the process of being implemented. And we're going to build on top of that, really, what are our agricultural projects? And so effectively, scenario 2, not only does it include the urban projects, but it's going to include both the in lieu and the direct flood mitigation, the direct recharge projects into what we're considering scenario 2. And so the goal behind that is to really say, okay, well, what is our basin going to look like when it comes to looking at the overall big picture of all of our supply side projects? Really, what will we be, how sustainable will we be if we don't touch our demand side of the equation? Really, what are we going to look at if we just implement these supply side projects? And effectively, what we're anticipating is while we can make a good dent in the sustainable yield numbers that we've looked at before and we've discussed prior, that we may not be able to fully achieve that looking at it just from the supply side. And that's really going to be our focus in scenario 3, is to take all of our projects and to revisit our sustainable yield estimates by looking at it as far as reintroducing that demand reduction with our projects in place. So as far as the other projects that we actually have 5 other projects that we're considering group 3 project. Now, again, these are conceptual projects. These are not projects that we're going to necessarily quantify directly in the groundwater model, but these are projects that we want to include in the GSP overall, because this helps us effectively showing the Department of Water Resources and the state in general that we are making efforts, that we acknowledge that we may not be able to achieve full sustainability in the short term with just our first group 1 and group 2 projects, but we do have other ideas should the need arise, looking at it at a larger time scale. So we actually do have both a group 3 project from the city of Modesto, as far as adding additional detention basins to try to attempt to gain additional recharge in the basin. And then we also are from the city of Oakdale, in conjunction with Oakdale Irrigation District, the potential of supplying surface water to Oakdale for non-potable irrigation. So this is going to be predominantly providing surface water to irrigate the city's parks to help reduce their groundwater demand. In addition to that, from the agricultural sector, we also have 3 other projects. As far as we have the flood mitigation off the Stanislaus River, so potentially incorporating any additional direct recharge if water is available off of the Stanislaus River and recharging that into the basin. In addition to that, in some of the other non-district east areas, we can potentially develop recharge ponds, again, to promote additional direct recharge, get more water infiltrating into our subbasin. In addition to that, we also have kind of on this category that I'm considering, it's a little bit of everybody, but the goal is to really kind of pick out to some of the potentially favorable lands for additional recharge projects, to take the idea of taking a look at where in our subbasin is the most optimum for potential recharge, both as far as quantity, being able to get enough water into the ground, and also location as far and hydrology related to keeping that water in the basin, really kind of figuring out where we can apply for the biggest bang for our buck. But again, these are group 3. These are kind of conceptual in nature, and we don't have a lot of details for them as of today. Okay, so now if we want to get into kind of some of the details, and I think some of the details as really what is that kind of that evaluation, right? So I have developed a scenario, what we're calling scenario 1, which is looking at some of the municipal and urban projects and management actions, really getting an idea and quantifying both really what goes into the ground and then really how that aquifer system reacts, right? How do our groundwater levels react? How's our storage react? Stream aquifer interaction, really kind of getting a grasp of really what happens to the water if we go through with each of these projects. So to give you kind of a rough lay of the land as I go through the next couple slides, what you're going to see on each of these slides on the left-hand side is going to be effectively a map. Now, because we have we do share a model, and we do have a lot of coordination between both our subbasin, the Modesto subbasin here in the north, and we also and our neighbors to the south, the Turlock subbasin. We're actually doing most of this modeling kind of in conjunction. So you're actually going to see some Modesto projects, but you're also going to see a few Turlock projects as well. And it's important that we are able to simulate those in conjunction with one another, because we do have effect on one another, both when it comes to subsurface flow, when it comes to overall management of the basin, and that stream aquifer interaction, particularly along the Tuolumne River. So I'll go through some of the details of that. Really not the focus of today's conversation, but I do want to make sure that everybody's aware that because we have this wonderful tool, this a modeling platform that allows us to simulate both the Modesto and Turlock subbasins, I want to make sure that everybody's aware that we are doing our best effort to capture both the sustainable projects that we can within both subbasins, that we really get a best picture as far as really what's going to happen in the future. And then on the right-hand side here, I have a quick descriptor as far as really what the projects are that we're going to be implementing and how we're going to be implementing them, and talk a little bit about the numbers related to it. So if I dive into the details here on this specific slide, really we're looking at two main projects from the city of Modesto. One being the city of Modesto, some of the conservation efforts that they've been working on over the past 5 years. And really the goal for a lot of these conservation efforts is to reduce their overall demand. And so what that means is we're going to reduce the per capita water use in the city of Modesto by up to 50 gallons per person per day. So in their 2015 urban water management plan and in the baseline, we actually projected about 228 gallons per person per day as kind of its unit volume of water that is effectively their demand. Since then, a lot of the conservation efforts and been based on their 2020 urban management plan, we believe that that value can be reduced to 175. And so really that's how we're being modeling moving that forward and see what some of the impacts of that conservation effort is. In addition to that, I did mention that there is this cross connection removal, and this is effectively developing recharge basins and really being able to these additional recharge facilities in the city of Modesto. And the goal of this again is to direct recharge into the aquifer system of up to about 250 or 248 acre feet per year. In addition to that, the last project we have as far as for our direct urban projects in the Modesto subbasin is bringing surface water to Waterford and Hickman. This is kind of a joint project, so you can see here that it is applying water to both sides of the Tuolumne River. So this is both predominantly in the Modesto subbasin with Waterford, but then some of that demand will be, or some of that supply will be going to Hickman as well. This is overall bringing about 900 acre feet of surface water originating from Modesto ID's water supply. This and utilizing the city of Modesto's water treatment plant, but then delivering that water to Waterford in hopes of reducing their groundwater demand. Now, outside of the Modesto subbasin, we have a couple projects I'm going to cover really quick related to the Turlock subbasin. This is predominantly going to be the Diane Storm Basin, bringing about 20 acre feet a year to the city of Turlock, in the city of Turlock, and also using Stanislaus State as some of their recharge facilities to bring up to 460 acre feet per year in the city of Turlock as well. And then the big project and really the main goal and main reasoning for including some of the city of the Turlock subbasins projects is this SRWA project, Stanislaus Regional Water. The idea is to bring potable surface water to the cities of Turlock and Ceres. Now, this is for our interest, this is predominantly focused in the city of Ceres, being immediately adjacent to our subbasin, and their reduction. It's important to capture their reduction in groundwater demand, so that we can properly capture the subsurface flows in this interaction between the two subbasins. And so the goal of this project is to bring up to 30,000 acre feet, 2/3 of that going to the city of Turlock, 1/3 of that going to the city of Ceres. And the goal of this is effectively we have a ramping up time period as the project kind of becomes implemented, it gets to build out over the next 20 years. And the goal of this is to bring that 30,000 acre feet overall to these two cities and really reduce their groundwater dependence. So if we want to take a look at really what is the results of that, right? So we've taken all that, we've taken this data, we've adjusted both the groundwater production, we've adjusted the surface water supply, so we've added additional recharge. Really, what does that mean for our aquifer system, and what does it mean for our subbasin in general? So if you want to take a look at the overall water budget we have here, this is our water use budget. And so effectively what we can see is that we're not really messing with any urban area or any generalized land use, but what we are adjusting is some of that urban demand. Now, this reduced urban demand is going to be 100% focused in the city of Modesto, right? This is that reduction, that conservation effort that I mentioned earlier. And what we're going to see is about a 12,900 acre feet less urban demand, less pumping from the city of Modesto. In addition to that, the Waterford project will bring overall 900 acre feet to that area. But as I said, it is shared between the two communities. And so we're going to see about 700 of that 900 being utilized in the Modesto subbasin. Effectively, the combination of these two, right, which we have less demand, we have more surface water. What that effectively means for the overall water use budget is that in general, we're going to see about 13,400 less pumping in the subbasin. And so really that's our goal, right? This is our, we reduce pumping and we hopefully will bring our basin into sustainability, at least one small step at a time. So what does that mean for the overall groundwater system? So if we comparatively from that previous budget, what we're going to see is that this actual black bar, which is kind of our change in storage, our cumulative change in storage over that 50-year period, the goal of this is to bring this all the way to zero. Now, effectively, we're not there today. We're not there with just these projects, but we are taking that incremental step forward. And so, if we want to talk about really what happens once these interactions really change, really. These are some of the long-term values. So as I mentioned from the previous slide, we are going to reduce our overall pumping by about 13,400. We can see that here. That's as one of the outflows. So there's basically this gray bar here is shrinking by about, on average, 13,000 acre feet a year. But what happens to that volume of water? So really what we can see is that overall, in addition to that 13,000, we also have a little bit of recharge, right? That's the recharge facilities in the city of Modesto. And that was also a kind of a direct interaction with this scenario. But if we see the kind of effectively the balance to this is that overall this reduced pumping kind of goes in a couple main categories. So that's going to be stream depletions, percolation, and subsurface flow. Now, percolation is going to be the most direct. When it comes to some of the conservation efforts in the city of Modesto, a lot of those conservation are going to be outdoor focused. They're going to be improving some of the irrigation efficiencies of our lawns, improving the efficiencies of the distribution network and such. And so really a lot of that, some of that percolation and that reduced consumption or some of that reduced consumption, reduced pumping is going to be reduced percolation, kind of if we're more efficient with some of that water. And so we're going to see about 4,800 of the 13,000 affecting the aquifer system by having reduced overall percolation. So that really leaves an interaction of stream depletion of about 6,000 acre feet per year and a subsurface flow of increasing of about 1,600. Now, these are actually kind of really important concepts when it comes to STRGBA because we can't just focus in on the change in storage. If we remember when we discussed some of both our minimum thresholds, discussed the baseline and a lot of the sustainability criteria under STRGBA, our stream aquifer interaction and our stream depletions are a very vital component of STRGBA. And so it's a very important feature that we are reducing our stream depletions. So we can see a little between about a third and a half of our overall reduced pumping is predominantly going to be going to reducing the stream depletions, right? So we're going to be more sustainable in the fact that we're not inducing any unnecessary depletions from the river system around us. And so really that's where a bulk of the volume is going. And then in addition to that, we also have our overall change in storage. We have about 1,500 acre feet per year staying in the aquifer system. And this is going to be directly related to higher water levels when it comes to looking at our water levels in some of our hydrographs. And if we want to take a look at this chart, and it says as far as our cumulative change in storage, as I mentioned, we are about 1,500 acre feet a year. That's per year that we're seeing improvement as by implementing these projects. We can see really what is the impact of that. And so really in this dark color here, the dark green, I have our baseline. Really that's without any of our projects. And by implementing these projects in the urban and municipal sector, we actually see this improvement of that 1,500 acre feet a year incrementally. Now, as I mentioned before, we definitely did not expect this to effectively solve our problem, but it is a first step. And so this is some of our projects this is some of our projects related to our urban sector, and really our goal, and hopefully at the next meeting we can provide some additional information when it comes to our agricultural sector as far as what is the effects on the water budget overall. But if we want to take a look at really what does it do to our groundwater levels, it's kind of like the last kind of major component here, right? We've touched on some of our water budget. We've touched on some storage, stream aquifer interaction. The last major component that we can focus on with the groundwater water model is to get an idea of really, well, how do these projects affect our minimum thresholds as they relate to water level? So effectively, what I've provided here is kind of a mix of hydrographs, including both the baseline here in the orange, the scenario here in the blue. And effectively, this is the difference between these two is going to be the impact that we're making from each of these projects, as well as a comparison from some of the observed data. Now, particularly when it comes to these two specific wells, you'll notice that both of these wells are going to be related to the city of Modesto. These are actually production wells, which is the reason why we see these huge fluctuations in a very short time period. Now, when it comes to these large fluctuations, these are going to be predominantly because they are production wells. And the model doesn't necessarily have the ability to simulate that the dynamics of being immediately on that well itself. But the overall goal here, and we actually see here when it comes to the historical calibration in this kind of the first third of this chart, is that the overall goal is to really capture the trend and to really capture the generalized water level here. So you can see here that we are capturing about the average value when it comes to the observed data. And again, we capture the overall trend. We can both see both in the simulation as well as the historical observed data, we can see this kind of generalized downward trend here as well. So we capture both of those, and that's part of our calibration. We've discussed that at previous meetings. And so really today, I want to really focus in on what are the impacts, right? Now, again, these are monthly averages, which is why we don't capture some of that fluctuation, but it just still gives us an idea of really, well, what is the kind of the head differential, or how many feet higher can we expect the water levels around these projects. So the last component I want to do is kind of to help familiarize yourself with how this slide works, is that the locations of these two hydrographs, you'll see here there's one in blue and one in purple, they are actually going to be related to the two dots that you'll see here on this map. And so the next couple slides, I have a couple dots similar to this one here. We're going to be focused really predominantly around the city of Modesto because we know that there's major projects, and so we want to make sure we be able to quantify the impacts of those projects as very near to that. And so really what we can see is that entirely through their conservation efforts and through a little bit much smaller recharge project that the city of Modesto has, we can see generally about a 3 to 5 foot increase in their water levels now. And overall we can see that as impacting the area kind of over the long-term trends, and it really does help, particularly when it comes to some of these minimum thresholds and our ability to not exceed them, because that's a really important part of SGMA. And so again, it all comes down to a combination really of these projects being focused in on stream depletions, and then in doing our very best to help stay above this minimum threshold line you can see here. And we see very similar trends in both of these Modesto in both of these Modesto projects. We can see that these trends, that overall we do see that increase of approximately 3 feet, and so that is that one step closer to sustainability. If we want to take another step at kind of two more projects, as you can see here, we got one on the west and one a little bit further east, but these are again kind of getting a little bit farther away from the center of the city of Modesto. So what we'd actually expect to see here is a little less of an impact. And it is exactly what we do see is that overall that as we get further away from the centroid of that impact, we start seeing a little bit lesser of an overall change in our water levels. And so predominantly comparatively to the previous slide where we were about 3, 4, sometimes even 5 feet, depending on the location. As you get outside of the city bounds, that differences shrink to about 1.5 to 2 feet. Similarly, here on the west or on the east-hand side, we can see that very similarly, we are increasing our water levels about 1 to 2 feet. But on the positive side, we are also seeing in some of these locations that we are no longer exceeding some of our minimum thresholds, which is a good step in the right direction. And the last couple of hydrographs that I have here are really focused in on Waterford. Now, this is an area where there is a project, and we definitely want to be able to make sure we show that impact. But when we're looking at the overall volume of water, when we're looking at the city of Modesto having 13 to 14,000 acre feet of projects that they are being implemented, we're obviously going to see a much larger impact in those. In that area, as opposed to a much smaller project being about the 700 to 900 acre feet for the city of Waterford. So because of that, when we look at here, the difference between the water levels of these projects, the impacts of these projects in our groundwater levels, we're seeing a little bit smaller of an impact that overall We're seeing this one at about 1.5 to 2 feet. And then as you get a little bit further away from the city itself, that difference actually shrinks to about 1/2 foot. And so, which is really a lot of some of the impacts of some of this smaller project. So before I jump into the next steps, I will just note that yes, we are taking that first step in bringing the basin just a little bit closer to sustainability. But I definitely want to make sure that I reiterate that we also have a lot more projects to implement. A lot of the agricultural projects are going to be much grander in size as far as pure volumetrically, and will be affecting the subbasin a little bit more. And I'm hoping to really be able to bring you some of those results at our next meeting. So then when it comes to next steps, really when it comes to our projects and management actions and really how we're some of the, the kind of the next steps that we're taking here, specifically related to PMAs, is going to be today, as I went through a lot of the results of our first scenario, and I hope hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion, and then if there are any potential refinements that the TAC wants to recommend or wants to implement, we can do that. We can kind of finalize this scenario here shortly, and then really the goal for this and the goal for the kind of upcoming month is to really focus in here on scenario 2. The goal is to be able to simulate all of our agricultural based projects, be able to really quantify those and really understand really what does our supply side solutions look like, and how do they implement or how do they impact the basin overall. And then hopefully, once I can come back at the next meeting and present scenario 2 to everyone, then the goal behind after that is to take a look at scenario 3. Now, the goal is to, once we have scenario 2 is approved, that we're all happy with how those projects are being implemented, and we understand and we're confident in some of the impacts that we're seeing, then at that point we can revisit the sustainable yield and determine really what does it take beyond the supply side solutions, what does it take to bring our basin into sustainability, and kind of wrap that up. So I know there's a lot of information there, so I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, or comments or anything of the sort.
Thanks, Dominic. Yeah, what's interesting about this is just how much, I mean, you've got a reduction of 13,400 acre feet every year. That's a sizable amount, and it really just shows how important it is that you have that reduction occur in the place that you need it. You need to focus the reduction or the projects, whatever it ends up being, or a combination thereof, in the right spot. And I think we've kind of touched on that previously, that we really needed to focus on that east side area, and doing our projects over there and management actions, things like that. So thank you very much for that. I'm really excited and anticipating that there's going to be a lot of interest in that scenario 2 run and scenario 3 run. So we're looking forward to that. Comments from the member agencies first.
Eric, no comments. Just thank you very much, Dominic, for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah,
Hey,
good.
Dominic, this is Walt with Stanislaus County. And I thank you, appreciate the work you've done so far, but my question, I guess, pertains to maybe future GSP updates or maybe implementation, and that is, if we didn't have this model, and I understand the constraints and the grid size and time step and all that, what other tools should we be thinking of and perhaps developing in terms of evaluating smaller scale models, and also for monitoring the implementation of these projects, and so far as we get feedback that they are doing their job, that they are achieving the benefits. So long way to look at it. If we didn't have this model, what would be better tools?
Absolutely. So having a groundwater model and a regional groundwater model of this size and of this resolution is incredibly useful for exactly what we're using it for, right? It helps us forecast out into the future, looking at a large scale, quantify our water budgets, look at some of these hydrographs, and definitely can acknowledge exactly as you said, when it comes to based on the resolution and the available data that we have within the model, that we may not be, super accurately picking up, very localized conditions. And really the goal behind all of Sigma is that we don't necessarily we use the model as a tool to help us forecast and to help us evaluate some of these projects. But this is actually where we generally pass a little bit of the torch back to Phyllis and her team when it comes to setting our minimum thresholds. And the goal behind a lot of Sigma is to really rely on observed data, looking at the water levels, looking at the monitoring network that they're putting together, and we judge ourselves on observed data and that monitoring network, the data that and really, and from there is really we have that idea of adaptive management, where as we move forward in time, we reevaluate this, right? So Sigma does have to be reevaluated on an annual basis. Is we can evaluate how we've been doing, how effectively we're achieving our sustainability goals, and we can utilize not only this model, but we can supplement this model with that monitoring network, with that real-time observed data to kind of make tweaks in our management actions and to really adjust what we're how we're achieving sustainability in the long term, right? So it's really not, there's no single tool that's kind of solve the problem for us or really tell us exactly what there is to do, but it's really this combination of tools that we have access to, and that's why we're attacking Sigma from several different angles, right? It's why our team, we've developed this model, we're utilizing this model, and it tells us, it gives us good vital information, and then we can also back that up with some of the other resources that we have available, and whether that is a monitoring network, whether that is there's effectively localized groundwater models that we can utilize. It's really kind of a combination of tools that we have based on really what the problem is and then really what solution we're looking for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other, Eric, I think you're muted, but are there any other questions from?
Yeah, any other comments from the member agencies? Thanks, Dominic. Okay, I see a couple hands up from the public. Not sure who was first here, so Director Menzinger, you're the top of my list.
Thank you. So I would like to ask Dominic to go back to the beginning of his presentation, please.
Absolutely. Do you have a particular slide?
So we'll start with this one.
Okay.
So it talks about storm drain cross connection removal project. Would this be basically taking water that now flows either to the sewage farm or the river and putting it in the ground?
Yes. So effectively the goal behind this is to adjust the city of Modesto's infrastructure to kind of facilitate using some of the retention basins to directly put that water in the ground. So this is directly over time allowing us to seep water into the aquifer system.
Okay. Under flood mitigation projects, you have Tuolumne River Flood Mitigation Direct Recharge Project. So can you tell me a little bit more about how would the flood flows be captured and then how would they be distributed?
Sure. So the Tuolumne River project specifically is really focused on the upper watershed related to the Tuolumne River. So this is going to be predominantly water that is captured in Don Pedro. Currently, this would, through implementation, this would have to be a project, kind of a joint project between Turlock and Modesto irrigation districts using their conveyance network or reservoir systems. The goal is to capture a lot of the upper watersheds flood flow and basically in the winter months, predominantly going to be in January and February, to be able to capture that in Don Pedro, use the conveyance system, how that transferred through both LaGrange and Modesto reservoirs, and then apply that either to utilizing the Modesto irrigation district conveyance network to either agricultural fields for recharge on a field itself, or utilizing direct recharge basins. Now, I think there's a little bit of uncertainty as to exactly the method as which the best means to apply that water or the exact location for that, but which is why this is kind of a group 2 project, again, still in the planning phases. But the goal of this is to utilize MID's conveyance network to apply this water, hopefully in the eastern parts of the subbasin where we have some of our current cone of depression, and to apply some of that recharge water directly to the aquifer system.
So you have Dry Creek Flood Mitigation Direct Recharge Project. How do we capture and distribute those flows?
Sure, that's not quite as the magnitude that we would have available to us from utilizing the Tuolumne River, the watershed, right? The Dry Creek watershed is a much smaller unit, but overall, it is kind of a very similar process. The goal behind it is to be able to capture flood flow, overland flow when it comes to large rain events in the wintertime, and the ability to capture it, to build recharge basins based on wherever that water is available, capture it into existing conveyance facilities and apply that water into recharge basins or on agricultural fields for direct recharge.
So Dry Creek doesn't have any dams on it. Are you talking about building dams on Dry Creek?
No, so this isn't necessarily utilizing effectively like a large scale dam. We could, there's a potential for developing some some what I would consider smaller retention facilities or additional recharge basins to really capture and divert that water directly from the creek itself to a recharge basin. And so I guess if you could consider a recharge basin as a very small dam, then effectively that is kind of conceptually what we would be proposing here.
Okay, could we go to the next slide, please?
Of course.
Okay, let's go to the next.
Sorry. Maybe Walt, should we ask if Walt has any more information on those projects? I think he submitted those for consideration, right? So, and the county, I believe, did a little bit of work already on some stormwater recapture kind of studies, right, Walt?
Yeah, right. That is work being done by the county's Public Works Department. And there are some grant funds that are leading that work. There has to be a DAC, a disadvantaged community benefit to it. But the idea is that you are able to capture or divert some of the spiky flows off of Dry Creek and either divert them to lands where they could take that water and provide direct recharge or in lieu. John Mensinger mentioned about the dams. Dry Creek is completely unregulated. There are no dam structures on it, but some of these structures could behave as small weirs and provide some level of detention, retention, and so in a way could act more in terms of regulating the Dry Creek flows. So there is a benefit that would come to Don Pedro operations in the sense that Dry Creek could be the inflows coming into the Tuolumne above 9th Street could be better forecasted and controlled, and therefore you would have more efficient operation of releases at Don Pedro in advance of different storm events coming into the watershed. So that work is public, and I think Public Works will be coming out with a final report identifying the project locations and more details. I believe that will happen over the next 6 months.
Thank you. So Dominic, could we go advance a couple of slides, please? Okay.
Is there a specific? Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, that's a good one. So we're talking about reducing demand, deficit per capita demand by 50 gallons per day.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is there any reason we're not looking at demand in Waterford, Oakdale, or Riverbank, or Salida?
Sure. So at least initially, so all the projects that I'm simulating were proposed by each of the agencies, and effectively, this was a proposal from the city of Modesto as a conservation effort and a quantification that they felt that they were readily implementing. And so effectively, the short version is we received this from the city of Modesto as a potential project for simulation. I haven't received any of that information from any of the other municipalities in the area.
Okay, so basically the project list is sort of projects that have been volunteered. And has there been any thought about other possible projects?
Can I help you out here, Dominic?
Yes, please.
These are projects that are essentially farther along, my understanding.
Mhm.
And Miguel's on the phone from the city of Modesto, but the city of Modesto has a plan together with these projects in it. And so they've done a lot more legwork to know what the quantities are. And so they were easier to model right now. There were some other projects that were listed at another point in this presentation, and they were the group 3 projects. And those are kind of similar projects. For example, the city of Oakdale surface water use to irrigate their parks from OID. We're actually starting to do that right now. We're hoping to get approval at the city of Oakdale's council here in the next few weeks to try and break ground on one of those projects that's kind of like a pilot type of project. And then at some point that would help us get more information to come up with these specific figures on what the savings would be. And then we can model them from there. But without having those figures already at our fingertips, it was hard to do that.
Fair enough. So Dominic, can you go to the next slide, please? Next one, please. Next one, please. Okay, so we're talking about a land and water use budget. Is this acre feet?
Yes.
So is urban area, every urban area in the basin?
Yes. Yes. What's your?
What I'm confused about, you're showing a demand reduction of 12,900 acre feet. Is that all in Modesto?
In this case, this is because everything's comparatively to the baseline. So effectively, this 12,900 is the reduction in demand is entirely based on that reduction in per person water use that we just spoke to.
Okay, so that I would just encourage you to double check your math. The figure may be correct, by the way. But what's confusing is the city of Modesto only uses around 50,000 acre feet a year. And some of that's got to be for industrial and commercial. So the 12,900 just strikes me initially as being high, but I could be wrong.
Sure. Yeah. So effectively, we have the overall reduction of so the overall reduction from 228 to 175 gallons per person per day. And effectively, the reason why this may seem a little bit high is that, remember, this is over a 50-year period. And so we comparatively to, while we have a current use of about 50,000 acre feet for the city of Modesto right now, we remember that 50-year projection includes a forecasted population growth, and which overall is going to increase the overall urban demand fairly significantly over the next 50 years. And so since these are kind of the average over that 50-year period, some of those percentages may seem a little skewed, but it is a direct reduction of that percent, the 175 over 228, I believe.
Well, I certainly, when you're looking at a 50-year time frame, amazing things can happen. And by the way, something that I commented on many months ago was a analysis of future demand, and it showed very vigorous growth to the west of Modesto. And I questioned the number because it didn't make any sense to me. And I don't know if that number has ever been updated or changed. But that's something I'm going to be looking at when I analyze the final plan, because it seemed really bogus. It was something like over 100,000 people west of the city of Modesto. I mean, it's hard to predict the future 50 years out. Anyway, fair enough. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure. If I can, just really sure, to help any, calm any concerns that you have. So I do remember that receiving that comment when we first developed the baseline however many months ago. And we have actually adjusted that since then. At the time that we did the analysis, since there, and also I guess the number that you're referring to is going to be all the unincorporated areas outside of the cities and any population growth. So the particular, predominantly a municipality, particularly something like the city of Modesto, that has a population growth is actually forecasted in their urban water management plan. So any population and urban demand directly from a municipality is going to be immediately out of the urban water management plans as developed by each of those independent municipalities. Now, so there is at least a little bit more certainty when it comes to some of the municipal numbers as opposed to some of the more rural domestic demands, and which I think is exactly where you're referring to as far as some of the western parts of the subbasin and more of the rural domestic population growth. And we actually did incorporate your comment at the time. I believe we utilized a similar projection growth, continuing the existing population growth from, I want to say the 2005 to 2015 period, so a 10-year period of growth. And effectively, similar to what you're referring to, we actually elongated that projected averaging from a 10-year period to the full 25-year period, and actually brought down the the rural population growth fairly dramatically. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me right now, but I just want to make sure that you're aware that we did take that comment into consideration and made an adjustment accordingly. So, but yes, acknowledging that there is lots of uncertainty with it.
Okay, thank you. So could we go to the next slide, please? Okay,
Sure.
and the next one. Okay, I think I'm done. I appreciate you taking the time to explain this over and answer my questions. Thank you.
Happy to. Thank you. Were there any other? I think we have two other comments.
Yeah, so Allie was next in line.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks Dominic for the presentation. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding this correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So scenario 1 is just looking at supply side reductions on the urban side and the modeling, and you've completed the modeling on those projects and management actions to determine like what their potential effect would be on the basin going forward. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's not just a reduction in demand, but we have a kind of that combination, right? We have the conservation projects, which is reducing demand, but then we also have two kind of effectively increases in supply when it comes to additional recharge. But yes, that is the case.
So it's looking at, so scenario 1 is just focused on urban, looking at both supply and demand side supply increases and demand reductions, and what their effect on the sustainable yield will be in the 50-year timeline.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the second scenario, I think you said, are just the agricultural based projects.
Mm-hmm.
But those are only looking at supply side solutions and not any demand reduction. Is that correct?
Yes. And then scenario 3 is supposed to add the demand reduction into the equation.
Okay, and so conceptually, you're taking like scenario 1, scenario 2, seeing how they affect the sustainable yield.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not getting the basin where it needs to be, then you're going to start looking, scenario 3 is looking at demand reduction to get to sustainability.
Yes, ma'am, that's the goal.
Okay, so then my second question has to do with the flood mitigation projects that have been proposed. Are those, I see that they're in scenario 2. So am I to assume that those are supposed to be somehow benefiting agriculture?
Yes. So, I mean, overall, realistically, a flood mitigation project benefits the basin as a whole.
Okay.
Comparatively, the agricultural sector in the industry utilizes a significant more volume of water than some of our urban and domestic users. And so predominantly they are being focused in on scenario 2. Now, there's also the component related to not just the proponent and as being agriculturally based, but really the fact that I'm really kind of looping them into with agricultural projects because they utilize so much of the existing agricultural infrastructure related to predominantly going to be the MID conveyance network and their reservoir system. And that's why they're really being grouped into group 2 rather than they just being entirely benefiting agriculture, if that makes sense.
Okay, but I'm just wondering though, like in terms of the benefit to the basin from those projects, I mean, in the only, I guess, management area that requires a reduction, a significant reduction is the non-district east. So would any benefit from those flood mitigation projects kind of go towards, I guess, maybe lessening the demand reduction that might be necessary from the non-district east?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so that's the overall goals with how we've approached the demand reduction scenario in the past, right? It was very focused in the non-district east area. So that's going to be it as we implement these projects. The goal is to reduce that overall demand reduction because we definitely don't want to have to do that. That's kind of the last ditch effort. Now, when it comes to a lot of these projects, particularly some of these flood mitigation projects, and one of the reasons why the proponent is listed as Stanislaus County is really we don't necessarily want to look at the volume of water directly going to be attributing to a specific user, right? These are basin-wide projects, and really kind of, we're purposely looking at this as all these supply-side projects as basin-wide. Eventually, once we get to demand reduction, yes, kind of what I think what you're getting to being the end result being to not have to mitigate the demand reduction from the non-district east areas.
Yeah, I guess so. My only concern on this would be looking at it in terms, and I understand looking at it in terms of the basin as a whole. These flood mitigation projects come online, and you're saying that the whole basin is going to really benefit from them, even though they're not, the entire basin isn't causing the issue. How are you going to allocate costs associated with those projects and bringing those online? Because it seems to me unfair that they might be allocated across the whole basin because it's technically benefiting the whole basin when it's really geared towards addressing a specific a problem in a specific area.
So I think that may be a better question targeted towards, I don't know if Walt or someone at MID wants to chime up on that, but I think for the goal really of the model development is really just to quantify the impacts of it. I personally don't get into the details of implementation, project design, cost sharing, things to that effect.
Yeah.
And I don't think these projects are to that point yet where a lot of that is known. But I'd be happy if someone else on the call can speak to them. Maybe they'd be better suited to answer your question.
Correct, because we talked about this a little. Honestly, and it's a really good question. There's definitely some work that could be done to help alleviate and mitigate for flooding that could occur in different parts of the basin. But the modeling effort is going to focus on putting that water and those projects, assuming that they're going to occur where we would optimally need them to occur to bring the basin into balance. And so that is obviously we found that has been the non-district east areas. So that's what the areas we're focusing on for the model are definitely the non-district east. As far as paying for the projects, and we're using some planning numbers here. So we don't have again, with these projects, we don't have a real refined number. We're taking our best estimate on what that could be, taking our best estimate on where we think those could occur most feasibly, and focusing them in the places that they need to occur to bring the basin into balance. So we won't have an answer to who's going to pay for them. It could be you get a grant for this, and the project, the flood mitigation is really needed, and the money is the non-district east or that group over there doesn't have the money or doesn't want to put in the money, and their funds come from a grant for someone else to solve the problem, but that would be kind of a loss, you would think. So hopefully we're throwing these out there as potential projects that would also solve another problem and hopefully get some grant funding and have some support from the people that need to do those projects. I guess that's probably the best way to answer your question.
Okay, yeah, and understood, and I get that you're trying to solve the larger problem. I just want to make sure that we're remembering that where the problem is, and that the cost associated with solving that problem shouldn't be borne by the people that are causing it. I'm hoping that maybe you can tell me if the next meeting, when you discuss scenario 2 in more detail, if some more information about the proposed projects on this slide are going to be discussed, and kind of what those projects really kind of consist of, because there's not a whole lot of information about them here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're actually still working through some of the details with the various agencies as far as really what are the what we don't, at this point, we're working on the volumes, we're working on the locations. There's still a lot of unknowns that hopefully we can work through prior to our next meeting. And I will be able to present as much detail as I am able to at that time.
Okay, yeah, and the same for the in-lieu supply and recharge projects, like some information about those, also just some background and how, they're planning to be implemented would be helpful as well.
Absolutely. I will make sure we do that.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and what I agree, we need to have at least disclose at least the where and the quantities. We don't know the specific parcels. We don't know the specific alignment of pipelines or ditches or all that kind of stuff. But certainly the level of detail that we provided today was what we were expecting.
I would anticipate something very similar to, probably one of the more detailed projects, for example, something to this effect, right? We can tell you approximately where a project is located by kind of the resolution of the model, because again, this is really modeling focused, right? So we're looking at the resolution of these elements. We can look at volumes. A lot of times when it comes to agricultural projects or flood projects, we talk about volumes under different water year types, right? We know that obviously there's going to be a lot more recharge available in a very wet year as opposed to a below normal or dry year. And so, we probably see a very similar slide to this, but for each and every one of our, I guess all of the 4 major projects that we have kind of in that scenario 2 model run. And so I'll break down all the details as far as they relate to the model, both for in-lieu recharge and for our direct recharge projects.
Okay, and including, like, I'm assuming also like the water budget, like the effect on the water budget from implementation, and then as well as the hydrographs of the wells that would see the most benefit.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good questions. Thank you. JBD, that's got to be John Davids. You're up, John.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Dominic, thanks for a good presentation. As always, you answered a lot of hard questions today, so I'm going to try and throw 2 softballs at you to close things out. The first is, it sounds to me, I recognizing that everybody's pedaling as fast as you possibly can, it sounds to me, you said a couple times today that you'd expect results from the scenario 2 modeling by next month. Is that a pretty reasonable estimation on your behalf?
So I think at the moment, kind of as I just mentioned a couple minutes ago with one of Ali's questions, is that we're really working with the various agencies to be able to quantify these. I think my goal would be able to really nail down some of the final details and be able to determine some of these PMAs and really kind of and get to that modeling, but it is really dependent on us being able to really flesh out some of the details. And so I would love to I will set a personal goal for them to be available at the next meeting for everyone. But I do acknowledge that, that I'm not the only one driving this ship, and we need to, we have some additional steps, some additional quantification that we need to get to with the various agencies, predominantly going to be, in this case, where we're going to be focusing on Stanislaus County and Modesto ID. And if we can get those numbers, then I can bring it to everybody as soon as humanly possible.
Yeah, no worries at all. I'm not trying to pin you down. Just want to make sure I heard you correctly. And then the second question is with respect to the City of Modesto demand reduction. And I think it's been pretty clear in the presentation, but just to ask the question again, the assumption there is that the demand reduction will only be applied to the volume of groundwater extraction that the City of Modesto has. and nothing, and there won't be any proportionate or subsequent decrease in the delivery of treated surface water to the city of Modesto. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And if we look right here, just so everyone else is fully aware, we do see overall demand reduction, and all this demand reduction is going into their a reduction in their overall pumping. There's a little bit of obfuscation with the Waterford project as well, but you can definitely see here that the urban surface water supply to Modesto is going to remain the exact same under these scenarios.
Very good. Thanks, Dominic. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got one more presentation. I've not seen any hands. Are there any more? I'll ask one more time, one more opportunity to provide any last minute public comments or questions on this before we move on. Okay, well, thank you very much, Dominic. That was great.
Thank you, everyone.
So moving on to item number 5, this is the monitoring networks and sustainable management criteria. And you are up, Phyllis.
Great. Hello again. Thank you so much for hanging in there. Just one more presentation this afternoon. I know everybody has seen a lot of them. Before I get into this, I would like to add one quick comment to Dominic's presentation. I know we're all focused in on quantities and changes to the hydrographs, and we continue to look at that because those are compliance features with respect to our SGMA work. But I wanted to just also point out that sometimes the location of pumping is not often readily seen or represented in the sort of regional model that's being depicted from Dominic's work. And one of the things that we found out as we went through our analysis of the water budget for the projected water budget in particular is that in the future we have some areas along the Tuolumne River where we are increasing stream flow depletion. So providing that surface water to Waterford and Hickman provides a little more benefit than even the model would suggest with respect to just the overall hydrograph associated with the Waterford area. So we're really pleased to see that project going forward and incorporating that into the overall GSP. Okay. So with that editorial comment from me, I'd like to get into a few additional details of the sustainable management criteria. We've talked so much about this and we are kind of heading down toward the last few details. And I want to start with a table that has the monitoring network associated with it. What we can see on this table is that the overall GSP monitoring well network consists of about 61 network wells. If you attended our office hours on August 25th, just a short couple of weeks ago, this has been actually modified even since then. So we are really coming down to making sure that we've got everything we need. And at this point, a final draft GSP network of about 61 wells is where we are, making best use of existing wells from the CASGEM networks, from the city of Modesto, who has installed their own local monitoring wells, from USGS, which you all paid for with respect to their overall Merced model work in the past, and then also incorporating the new wells that have been drilled under the Proposition 68 grant. So we have a really nice, I think, combination of existing and new wells. As you might recall from all of our additional meetings, we've defined undesirable results, we've set minimum thresholds, and we've developed measurable objectives for an approach for each one of those. And so now that we have our monitoring network in place, we can actually begin to assign the minimum thresholds, the measurable objectives, and now interim milestones to each of these representative monitoring wells that are in the network. And so today I'd like to just, now that we have the monitoring network in place, we've had the opportunity to finalize some of these things for TAC member approval. And so we won't put you on the spot today, but would like to provide to you our technical recommendations for some of these criteria. And hopefully we can have additional discussions and feedback going forward in the next 2 meetings or so. We're going to start with what's called the minimum threshold exceedances. And this relates back to an undesirable result definition. And then I'll finish up with interim milestones. So beginning first with this concept of minimum threshold exceedances, the GSP regulations actually require the GSAs to determine when and where the effects of groundwater conditions actually cause undesirable results. This is really nice because it recognizes that from a technical perspective, an exceedance of an MT one time in one well may not actually cause any kind of a regional or aquifer-wide undesirable result. Rather, it may be a combination of exceedances over a portion of the aquifer. And so that's what the regulations ask the GSAs to consider. This is, of course, a technical issue, but it's not just a technical problem because they are estimates, really, and there's a variety of ways to sort of skin this cat. So we have a technical approach that we have recognized and want to bring to the group today. This whole process really allows for some decline to occur during drought as long as water levels can subsequently recover to our designated levels without undesirable results. So again, I think this is flexibility that is needed in the process and a good recognition of how an aquifer system behaves overall. The fact that it gives you an opportunity to have a time component, sort of the when portion of the when and where, allows the GSAs to get signaled from the groundwater system that there might be a need coming up for management actions and projects to remedy those local conditions. So it gives everyone an opportunity to go on guard to make sure that we are monitoring, that we are managing the aquifer in a sustainable manner. And then finally, overall, this just provides additional operational flexibility for groundwater management. So I think it's an important tool in the toolbox. It has to be used wisely, and it has to be used in an adaptive manner, because I can bet you that we won't get this one exactly right from the start, but we certainly have made an effort to move this forward. So let's do this by looking at the monitoring networks that we have in place, and we're going to start with the upper Western Principal Aquifer. So this is the area that is to the west of that dashed red line, which represents the extent of the Corcoran Clay. And you might recall that we have a principal aquifer both above and below the Corcoran Clay in the area. And we are also using the chronic lowering of groundwater levels, minimum thresholds, and measurable objectives for a proxy for the reduction of groundwater and storage and for land subsidence. We've talked quite a bit about how we have correlated our water levels back to a volume of sustainable yield for the reduction of groundwater and storage. So I think we have a strong technical basis for the proxy there. And we also are using the chronic lowering of groundwater levels minimum thresholds because they prevent water levels from going below historic lows, and as such give us a good chance at mitigating or avoiding any exacerbation of land subsidence in the future. As you know, we've reviewed this many times, but we really have no noticeable impacts from any potential land subsidence in the Western aquifers. But given the conditions that are to the south of us in the San Joaquin Valley, we recognize that there's a future potential for it here, and we want to be sure that our sustainable management criteria acknowledge that. So with this slide that you're looking at here, you see 17 wells in our Western Upper Principal Aquifer that's shown there in the west of the Corcoran Clay extent. And we have to quantify when and where we might see MT exceedances such that an undesirable result could be triggered. Again, this is not any kind of prescriptive or very precise process, but what the technical team has looked at from a variety of angles here and is proposing is that the undesirable result be defined to occur when the minimum threshold is exceeded by about a third of the wells, by 33% of the wells in that principal aquifer, in this case, the Western Upper Principal Aquifer, for 3 consecutive fall monitoring events. So that 33%, we have 17 wells, so 33% there is 6 wells. So that gives you kind of an understanding of the 17 wells that you see on this map. If 6 of those wells begin to exceed the minimum threshold, and they do that over 3 consecutive fall events, then that's triggering an undesirable result just by definition. It may not actually occur as an undesirable result, but we will be looking at that and evaluating that as we get closer to our 5-year time frame. But we want to set up a relatively protective constraint going forward. The 3 consecutive fall monitoring events comes from the 2013, 14, and 15. As we went through those 3 fall events, I think that drought, even though it really was the drought of record at that time, we're continuing in that drought. And I think that that teaches us that when we began to see domestic well problems, we began to see them in the 2015, 2016 timeframe. And so that gives us that 3 consecutive fall monitoring event for the criteria. So that's for the Western Upper Principal Aquifer, and we have the same construct for the Eastern Principal Aquifer. There are more wells out here, but I think overall, this gives us sort of the same level of protection. So an undesirable result, again, occurs when the minimum threshold is exceeded by 33% of the wells in this Eastern Principal Aquifer for this map. For the 3 consecutive fall monitoring events, there are 39 wells in the Eastern Principal Aquifer. So this gives us a little flexibility that 13 wells would need to exceed the minimum threshold for 3 consecutive events to trigger an undesirable result. Again, this doesn't mean that we're just going to sit around and watch these water levels go down and go, hey, we're good, hey, we're good, hey, we're good. Okay, now we're not. This is going to be active management, especially during these first 5 years of implementation. But we do need to determine what would be designated as an undesirable result. So continuing this construct with the Western Lower Principal Aquifer, and again, using this for the 3 sustainability indicators that you see down in that lower right-hand area, we are also applying this same 33%. We've talked quite a bit about this. I'll mention it again, that the Western Lower Principal Aquifer obviously has some data gaps. We only have 5 wells in this lower aquifer. We have other information that we're going to continue to monitor, and those consist of wells that are screened both above and below the Corcoran clay. So it isn't as if we have 0 information on water levels in that area, and in some cases that head difference is only a few feet. So we will be continuing to monitor those wells, and it isn't as if we will have no information there. But I do think that this is a data gap that we're going to want to fill going forward, and I know that Modesto Irrigation District is continuing to consider as a management action and improvement of the network for the Western Lower Principal Aquifer. Again, if you have 5 wells, which is what we currently have, 33% of that would be 2 wells. And I think those are in good locations with respect to the Western Principal Aquifer because they are near the extent and they help us better understand kind of what's going on above and below the Corcoran clay. And then there's just one more set of maps for the interconnected surface water. We have 3 river boundaries, as everyone knows, and within our principal aquifers, we would be looking at the shallowmost aquifers for both of those areas along the 3 river boundaries. The Tuolumne River has 10 wells, the best coverage, thanks especially to the new wells that we've recently been able to drill under Proposition 68. Most of those areas are covered with respect to monitoring wells along the river. There are 10 wells along the Tuolumne, and so a third of those would be 3 wells that we would be looking at fall monitoring events. Again, we're going to be looking at spring and fall, not only of these wells, but other wells in the subbasin. But again, the undesirable result definition needs to be set up such that it is triggered by the representative monitoring wells. So that's what we're setting up here. Along the Stanislaus River, we do have some data gaps in the northeastern reaches of the Stanislaus, the upper reaches, and then we don't quite have all of the lower reaches covered down to the San Joaquin either. And as a result of that, again, we'll be looking to fill and improve the monitoring networks with one of our management actions. And the Stanislaus and the San Joaquin River will be the two rivers that we would be focused on first, just to be sure that we fill in some of these gaps. If you are, again, applying the 33% for the Tuolumne and the Stanislaus, 10 wells would be 3 wells would be exceeding the minimum threshold to define an undesirable result. And for the Stanislaus with 8 wells, there would only be 3 wells needed to actually trigger an undesirable result there. So these aren't perfect networks, and in some cases it's going to be a little tight to make sure that we manage our water levels and data appropriately. But I think that these are reasonable for setting up a construct going forward for implementation. I do want to say something about, again, the San Joaquin River. You only see 2 wells down there. So it just really doesn't make any sense to say a third of 2 wells. And so I just changed that to 50% of the wells on the San Joaquin River, just to recognize what we are looking at now for our final draft monitoring network. But again, recognizing that as the Modesto Irrigation District and the GSAs go forward with improvement of the monitoring network, that we would be anticipate adding. One of the things that I'll do in the sustainable management criteria is in the 50% on the San Joaquin River, I will note that this it was done because we only had 2 wells on the river, and that as we add more wells, we might be able to incorporate the construct that has been set up for the other rivers as well. So that ends the first portion of this presentation that covers the undesirable result triggered by a minimum threshold exceedance. So I'm going to stop here to see if there are any questions quickly on this before we move to the last few slides on interim milestones. And unfortunately, when I'm in this view, I can't see hands raised. So I'm going to ask for help on if we have. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So let's take questions from the member agencies first, please. Any questions from the member agencies on this? Okay, I see a hand raised from the public. Director Menzinger.
Yes, I would like to ask Phyllis to go back to the slide showing the eastern part of the aquifer. So it says an undesirable result happens when we have 13 wells where a threshold is exceeded. So my question is, this eastern aquifer is quite a large part. It's actually the eastern 2/3 of the aquifer. And is it possible that we could have overdrafting in the non-district east part of this aquifer, and that overdrafting would not be reflected in 13 wells?
Yes, it is possible. And we could tighten that up if we wanted to, but what I'm trying to do for this aquifer is to give us a little bit of flexibility. Remember that our MTs are not our only points of compliance. We're going to have management areas management actions that require us to begin to incorporate projects and other actions going forward. And we will also have an action plan of when any MT exceedance occurs that we begin to go forward. But the reason that I've provided this flexibility in the Eastern Principal Aquifer is primarily because of this. Number one, you can see that in the non-district East management area, which is that light orange, we don't have that many wells. And we do have even a couple of wells, the Paul Cell wells, in the OID management area dedicated to the non-district East activities. We also see that those non-district East activities have further resulted in water level declines into the OID management area. So in the OID management area, we have wells in the eastern portion, in particular, the Futuro OID Casgem well has a very, very steep decline in that well, as well as some of the other wells within OID. So our anticipation is that we needed a little bit of flexibility such that there, not only the non-district east areas have continued to see declines, but those declines have manifested themselves in other areas of the basin. So we needed an opportunity to allow for a minimum threshold exceedance to occur in other areas before the undesirable result is triggered. And so that's sort of the thought process there. I don't know if that answers your question or makes sense.
Well, I think it answers my question. I think I still have a concern about that, and it's something I'm going to be thinking about in the weeks and months to come. But I just lay it out as a concern. And
Yeah.
obviously, I would like to see more monitoring wells in the agricultural areas of the non-district east.
Me too. That would be great. I do want to point out that some of this process by where we define the undesirable result, we do want input on this. We do want stakeholder guidance on this, as well as TAC member guidance. We've had quite lively discussions within the TAC planning group. We've gone back and forth a bit on what might be the best way forward with this. And if we need to adjust some of these MT exceedances, number one, it's not too late. And number two, the TAC certainly could consider it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone right now?
So Director, oh, there we go, hands down. Okay, Allie, you got your hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on the last question. So how could you adjust the MTs to address the concern that was just raised? I mean, without the monitoring well, how could you just adjust the MTs to account for the potential that what Director Messenger just brought up?
Right. So all we would have to do is change the 33% to a smaller percentage. So maybe 25% might be a reasonable alternative. The only issue again there is that almost 13 wells have already been impacted by what we see in the non-district east area. And so we are concerned about having exceedances of MTs outside of the non-district east areas as a result of what we have, where we have lowered wells in that area as well. So that was part of the reason behind expanding the construct to include what we had been using for the other aquifers. Does that make sense, Allie?
Yeah, so if you adjusted the MT to account for the concern that Director Menzinger just raised, then you would be like, as soon as this is adopted, you would already be showing desirable results. And basically that's your reasoning for not doing it right now.
Yes, and recognizing that right now with the current, we have set MTs pretty close to the levels where we are right now. In some cases, we have some wells that are below it, but we don't appear to have undesirable results in the subbasin right now at these levels. So from a technical perspective only, that's where I was sort of coming from when we first thought this through. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. Let me think about it.
These are difficult concepts. I appreciate any brain power going to this to assist. Okay, Eric, shall we move on?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody with their hands up, and we'll give them another shot at the end of the presentation. So
sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, and so also to address all of this, what we've been talking about, and Allie made the point very nicely that I was going to make right here, which is, we are doing two things here. We are trying to balance what is going to happen with respect to a reality here, which is how quickly we can get projects in place, how quickly we can turn the overdraft situation around and balance the basin. And we're trying to balance that with becoming sustainable just as soon as we possibly can. And another tool that is allowed us in the regulations as we get into the implementation phase, recognizing that we may not be sustainable on day one, is what's called an interim milestone. And DWR requires that you set an interim milestone. You don't have to set them below a minimum threshold. You just have to simply say where you think the basin will be if the projects and management actions that you have in your plan are implemented going forward. And for us, given that we are continuing to be in a drought, I think when it rained in 2017, a lot of us sort of breathed a sigh of relief and thought, okay, we've set things up nicely and, SGMA can move forward. But as we got on the other side of 2017 and we still have drought conditions going forward here, I think many of us technical people are concerned that we don't want to set our basins up for failure. We want to move forward as aggressively as we possibly can. We want to avoid undesirable results. We want to protect our rivers and our domestic wells. And in doing so, we also want to give ourselves an understanding of what is reasonable and what is realistic. And so I think for the subbasin, given our rates of decline, it's probably realistic of the subbasin to consider setting your first milestone, your interim milestone, a little below your MT. It's allowed by the regulations as shown on this graph that DWR put together. We've reviewed this before, I didn't say much about it, but essentially the orange line there represents a generic minimum threshold, and the sort of shaded orange area below that represents the undesirable results as defined by SGMA below the minimum thresholds. But again, the implementation period allows for what's called a glide path. And I'm going to just pop a line where I've just connected these dots, whereby as you move towards sustainability, you might have to continue your ongoing declines a bit, being very careful, of course, that we don't get into a position of triggering undesirable results during that process. But we do have the opportunity to set an interim milestone below the minimum threshold as needed. And given the drought conditions that we have seen in this basin and the continued rates of decline, I would suggest that I think you're going to need this tool. And so let's think about what you might do to apply the tool in your subbasin. So what we did as a first pass, and this is our actual technical proposed methodology for the TAC members to consider and comment on, we developed that first interim milestone, the 2027 methodology, using our CASGEM wells in OID and non-district east management areas. Now, why did we do that? We did that because these have excellent historical data. We all want new wells, we all want more wells, but we aren't going to be able to recreate the past with these new wells. So it's really important that we have these CASGEM wells available to us. And they provide us with some guidance on rates of decline compared to the drought conditions. And so again, using those two areas, we recognize that water levels there may continue to decline while projects are brought online. And it depends on the future. If it rains this year or next and we get out of the drought and we have more surface water available in the subbasin, then maybe this will change. But this is a bit of a stopgap measure in the event that we have ongoing difficult conditions for SGMA implementation. For our methodology, we're assuming a continuing rate of decline through those first 5 years of GSP implementation. And so to come up with that, we actually just took the actual groundwater elevation decline that we have observed in those wells from fall 2013 to fall 2020, a 7-year time frame, to add to the fall 2020 measurement. So that 7-year gets us to the 2027 interim milestone time period. So it's very straightforward. I think it's a very simplistic method, and I think that groundwater management is often best served when it is a relatively simplistic process, because it's difficult enough to know what's going on in the aquifer without a lot of additional sort of detailed statistical methods piled on top of that. And so what we saw from that result of that process, that methodology, is that we would anticipate that the aquifer in those areas would decline about 13 feet. That's an average over the 7 wells that we saw this decline in. And 2 of those non-district east wells, the Paulsell wells, which are really in the heart of the overdraft area, they saw a decline of 36 feet. So that would mean an interim milestone of 36 more feet in that area. And so what does that look like? Well, here we have the sort of the 2 extremes. We have the Allen well, which is relatively close to the Stanislaus, but it does represent what's going on with respect to many of the OID representative monitoring wells. We see sort of a gradual decline that has occurred into this drought of record that we're experiencing these days. And you can see where the measurable objective and the minimum threshold has been already determined, and applying a rate of decline continuing forward into 2027 gives you another 11 feet below the fall 2020 measurement. So another 11 feet of decline. I'll just point out that this is an area where we have had impacts to domestic wells, and it's also an area where we want to be very protective of the river. So from a technical perspective, I was really quite encouraged that we are only looking at 11 feet for an interim milestone. I think that's reasonable, and I think that can avoid impacts to domestic wells in the area. We have more water than that indicated in that area. I think there are 1 or 2 very, very, very shallow wells, which could be an issue, but I think overall 11 feet is reasonable. Again, for the Paulsell wells, a much different picture. We have, as you can see from the hydrograph shown here, a rather steep decline going on. That would indicate another 36 feet below the fall 2020 minimum threshold. So that again is a much larger allowance of a decline. I think we need to remember from an aquifer standpoint that another decline of 20 to 30 feet or so will not necessarily manifest itself throughout the entire eastern subbasin all at once, but it's certainly something that we would like to avoid. Having said that, I think we need to plan for the worst and then attempt to implement projects in the short term as quickly as possible so that we can avoid this altogether. But again, thinking in terms of a planning process, I don't think that you can just have your plan that you hope it rains. So again, a decline of about 36 feet would be indicated in those areas. And then just wrapping up the methodology, we would not anticipate that we could hold those interim milestones below the minimum threshold, and we would not want to, because we would want to be able to avoid undesirable results associated with that. So as a result of that, I would point out that it took us at least 15 years or so to get into this condition that we're in now. So it's going to take a little while to get out of it. And I think that setting up an interim milestone in the 2027 timeframe may be needed while projects are coming online. But then we absolutely can expect to hit the minimum threshold by 2032. I think that's reasonable given the given the need to move towards sustainability. And then again, moving into the 2037 glide path, moving up to our measurable objective. So we are only talking about one interim milestone being below the minimum threshold. And I won't pretend that it's great news with respect to the central portion of the eastern subbasin. And as a result of that, it really, I think, lights the fire under our feet to move forward as quickly as possible to get projects going there. At this point, I just have a next step slide. So before I go to that, maybe if we have any questions on this part of the discussion.
Questions from member agencies? Okay, questions from the public?
I've worn you down.
No hands up right now, so let's finish it off, yeah.
All right,
Excellent.
thank you all very much. So our next steps, of course, are to finalize all of these sustainable management criteria. The one thing you have not heard from us about yet in a very long time is water quality. And there's a reason for that. There's a lot of data and a lot of focus and a lot of information that we had to gather. As you know, we're coordinating and working closely with what's going on in the Turlock subbasin. So we wanted to see the Turlock subbasin finalize their water quality criteria. And they struggled quite a bit with that. I think we changed it 3 or 4 times. So you might benefit from not having to modify yours a lot if the TAC group and everyone feels that we can move forward with something similar to what the Turlock Basin is doing. Your constituents of concern are different, and you have a lot of information in the city of Modesto to lean on. So we have a little bit different of an analysis here. But we will be bringing the water quality sustainable management criteria to the TAC planning group and then to the full TAC. And then, of course, in public meetings, we will be discussing that in the upcoming next 2 public meetings. As Dominic presented today, we're finalizing the analysis of projects and developing the draft management actions. You're going to see GSP chapters coming out very soon, and then they're going to be followed one after the other. The water budget is coming next. It's essentially done, and as soon as we can grab our modelers who are in the throes of doing all of the project analysis, so we can get them a little bit of breathing room. They're going to finish up the TAC comments on the water budget and get that chapter out right away. So that will be coming probably this month as well, followed by sustainable management criteria and the monitoring networks. At this point, you've seen everything that you would see in the monitoring network chapter. The only difference is that it's nice to have it all laid out in tables and maps, and sometimes gives you a better opportunity to see it rather than just a PowerPoint that flies by. So anyway, you will have the opportunity to see all of what we've talked about today coming soon and actually written up in GSP chapters. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any final questions. Appreciate your time.
Okay, so I would anticipate that we're going to have a lot of action items on that October meeting, that October GSA meeting. What do you think, Phyllis? I mean, water quality, we're going to have these sustainable management criteria likely here, and then potentially some projects, management actions lists that we need to kind of get direction, formal direction on, right?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for helping me make that agenda. You know, we have considered, and I'm hoping that the schedule works, that we can also have a special meeting at the end of September, not wanting to just kill everybody, but if we can move through some of the additional steps that we need to get, especially water quality and the continuation of the modeling of projects, if we can get that done by the end of September, then that would be great as well.
Yeah, so we're proposing a meeting for September 22nd, and that'd be a TAC meeting. And then we'd likely come back to the October 13th GSA meeting and take some action. So we'll have one more TAC meeting, but the next GSA, really are going to have a lot of questions and items to take action on. So hoping to make a lot of progress. Thank you very much for that presentation, Phyllis. We'll take other questions, comments from the member agencies here on this presentation. Okay. Any questions, comments from the public on this presentation? Okay, well, thank you very much, Phyllis.
Thank you.
To the September 22nd meeting, because that's our next item on the agenda, is just letting everybody know that we're planning for a special TAC meeting on September 22nd. That will be 1:30 on Zoom. Want to get some feedback from the member agencies if there is any feedback on that right now. Okay, questions, comments on that from the public? Okay, we'll plan on that. And then item 7 is just any items too late for the agenda, which I believe there are none. And correct me if I'm wrong. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Make a motion.
Second.
Thanks. Motion from Miguel, second from Mike, I believe.
Yes.
Thank you very much. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us.
Thank you all.